So I think it's important to clarify some things on my stance on all this Black Lives Matters and All Lives Matters and the racial narrative. For me, I have to ground everything back to Scripture. So the Bible very clearly, without any question whatsoever, says that God accomplishes all that He pleases and what He desires. It says clearly that God sets a man's boundaries that he cannot move from or alter or change, and that no man can thwart God's plans. So that said, that's the foundation that and God's not racist. Racism is not biblical at all whatsoever. So it plays no part in this at all, because God shows no partiality, yet alone for skin color. And Jesus condemns and says it is a sin to judge others based on yourself or based on what you believe to be right. Rather, he says to judge righteously, which is to judge things based off of truth and Scripture with non-bias. So obviously, God's not going to do what Jesus condemns, because that would be a contradiction and would be an oxymoron in regards to truth. So what God destines for a man and the boundaries that He sets for that man have nothing to do with the color of his skin. So it is unbiblical to say that anybody prevents or can prevent anyone else from doing a certain thing. Excuse me. And then furthermore, I would say that's evidenced by actually fact and proof. The very first self-made millionaire female was a black woman, and she lived from 1866, so right before slavery ended, until 1919. And she was a self-made millionaire entrepreneur. And obviously, where was her oppression? So there are facts to back up the biblical underlying truth that God sets these boundaries. So that said, you can also see it in our life. If I was born in a trailer park to poor parents, no education, and my parents taught me to be racist, and I hated Mexicans or I hated blacks, that'd be an unfortunate uprearing for me, and it would be hard for me to get out of that rut and out of that hole. It'd be easy to just live there in that trailer park, following the steps of my parents, but I'm not bound to that. I have the ability to apply myself and to chase after my dreams, do something I want to do. You also see that in all races, because again, there are successful business owners in all races. There are successful actors in all races. There are successful politicians in all races. So there's enough proof in the pudding to make that a true statement. There's no white privilege for the poor kid that's born into the trailer park whose mom and dad are alcoholics or in and out of prison and drug addicts, and they have no way to earn money, and they have to raise each other because they have no parents. It has nothing to do with race. There's no white privilege. However, their circumstances do not bind them to those consequences and dictate the outcome of their life. They have the ability to move. They have the ability to make better choices and different choices. And so do we. So based on these facts, with the underlying premise, the truth about God and God's sovereignty, and the lack of racial or racism in God's sovereignty and in the things that He ordains and destines and purposes, it completely invalidates the rest of the narrative. So that's my foundation. That's why I believe what I believe. And to me, Scripture cannot be broken, so there's no argument against it, other than the emotion, feeling, and experience that we see in our lives. People have different outcomes, different... I got jumped by a bunch of Mexicans when I was in Caldwell. I was 18, 5 of them, just because I was white. It happens. sin is pride in our flesh, and the world is full of sin, and we are all sinners, and it happens. But that does not mean that you're a victim. Don't be a victim.